couple of questions. Are Sumatras a year-round coffee? It seems like I can get Sumatras in June. I can get them in, any month. I can't think of a period that I really can't find them.
Yes, they're available, tend to be available all year round. I'm not really sure whether this is just a reflection of how the industry operates, but I do know that is striking in the Lintung area, at any rate, where I spent a lot of my time. I would see branches with flowers at the tip of the branch and ripe coffee fruit at the other end, and various stages of development in between on one branch. I don't think this has been studied formally, so apologies to the scientists who will eventually study this, but it appears to me that in the Lintung area, or the Mandiling, the area where the classic Sumatras come from, simply a lot of overcast weather, misty, overcast weather. I think that it's kind of a slow haul harvest. I'm sure that we'll have studies that will explain all this. In the Aceh area, ACEH, the other main growing area for Sumatra coffees, the seasons are a little clearer. It's more of a conventional coffee industry in Aceh. Nevertheless, in Aceh they do beautiful wet-hulled coffees also. So I think maybe it has to do with the weather and the maturing, because there are some coffee growing regions, at least until global warming, where there's a very decisive harvest.
Yes.
In Brazil, it used to be fairly dry or normal weather, and then there'd be a very decisive rainy season and a very decisive flowering. Acres or hectares are covered with flowering trees, and then the fruit ripens all at about the same time. Which is why in Brazil they used to get away with strip picking, because the middle part of the branch would be all red, and why they're able to use machine harvesting now. But Sumatra definitely has a gradual flowering and fruiting.
So are you telling me that the different regions, for instance, the Aceh, Lintung, Mandiling, they're all pretty much the same varieties of coffee, tree varieties meaning, and really the similar climates, but the wet hulling and their local distinctions will work together to give them a different taste?
Well, let me just show the Aceh. Here we go again.
Okay, good. Let's go in on this.
Aceh region is at the very tip of Sumatra. The culture is a little distinctive because it's entirely Muslim, whereas the rest of Sumatra is not. It tends to have tribal religions or Christianity. The Lintung area, there's a little blue here, that's Lake Toba, an enormous, beautiful lake, and that's also a bit of a tourist attraction. And around Lake Toba in the highlands is the Lintung area. Lintung actually equivalent of a county called Lintung Nihuta, where that's the center of it. Coffees of that style are grown all around in the highlands around Lake Toba. Those are the traditional Sumatra coffees, and that's where the wet hulling was first discovered by those of us who went there. Mandiling is also a place, but it's really has become, in the tradition, in the late decades of the 20th century, it became associated with this style of coffee, the wet-hulled style. So in a sense, somebody says Mandiling, they're really describing a coffee style.
Rather than actual location with a GPS
locale.
Finding it. Okay.
Right, exactly. Because you have a lot of Aceh coffees that are traded as Mandiling because they're wet-hulled and because they fit the type. And because it helps sell the coffee, helps identify with it, they'll call it Mandiling. It's because they're all shipped through Medan, the same port. I'm sure the exporters, somebody says they want a Mandiling and they got Aceh and it's a pretty good one, they'll send it on as Mandiling. So maybe not, but not anymore.
So is that done? Let's as long as we're I want to gossip a little bit about that. Just and everyone know that we're not. None of this can we know for sure in each case, of course. But is it well known in the coffee industry that coffees are sometimes labeled for whatever gets them the best price, not the market?
Well, traditionally in the coffee industry, I think this has been true.
Yeah.
It's increasingly not true because we have the traceability movement, as you know, where the particular group of, call them high-end, third-wave roasters, are attempting to be as particular as possible.
Right.
Now, a lot of times they're not that particular. They try to be, but they can't get the information, and perhaps they have to fudge a little bit in their descriptions. But obviously, today, if you're buying fine top-end coffee on the internet, you want to read about, you're accustomed to reading about the producer and the tree variety and some of the circumstances, maybe a heartwarming story about third-generation grower and somebody came back from college to run the farm. We're used to that kind of sales language, but certainly there's a value in traceability. In other words, there's more money for a traceable coffee. So what I wanted to say about Ache is that in Ache, there's a more conventional arrangement of the industry. In Lintung, you have the small producers do the first steps of processing the coffee, growing and processing. It's collected by people called collectors. And the collectors often have a relationship with all the farmers. It's an understanding. And the collectors then take the coffee to these mills, owned usually by exporters, and then the next process, the wet hulling and drying happens, and then it's sent down to the port in Medan. That's the supply chain that created classic wet hulled Sumatras. In Aceh, that also occurs, the same arrangements, but also in Aceh there are more cooperatives. It's more of a conventional arrangements. And also they produce, traditionally in Aceh, they produce a wide range of processing methods. So if you have a cooperative with a centralized mill and a sophisticated guy who's been to Texas A&M or something and has come back to, so he'll be familiar with the possibilities of wet processing, dry processing, or natural. So often the wet hulling will be a choice. The exporting arrangements are more direct with much greater possibility of traceability. So Aceh is a different industry. It looks different too. It's kind of mountains around Lake Tawar, which is a much smaller lake than Lake Toba. It's usually grown in managed shade. In Lintung, it's a very raggedy looking landscape. You have fruit trees scattered around coffee trees and other crops, and because it's all small producers. The coffee is almost never shaded, partly because I think they have this tendency to have overcast. But the other thing that's happened to the wet hulled is they've gotten more refined. Because before it was almost like a folk method, right? It just happened. That's the way we do it. Now, the way we do it is clear to many people that it's valuable and it's different. And they had better do it carefully. In the past, I think, when we were talking First Taste of the Sumatra, I think it was really the skill of the coffee buyer to find the good lots where this sort of creative mustiness, this earthy, malty kind of taste worked, and would dismiss the ones that tasted like wet old clothes. Increasingly, I think today, the people on the ground in Sumatra are refining the procedure so that they're producing more consistent wet hulled lots. That's my impression.
I have another question, and that is, since, as you said, the wet hold method is common to a number of coffees from Indonesia, why when I've had a Bali, for instance, or Papua New Guinea or Sulawesi, why is it that I generally taste a very different coffee than when I get, particularly a Papua New Guinea, than when I get a Sumatra?
Well, I realized that I got this map out to clarify the distinction between Indonesian coffees and Papua New Guinea.
Oh, okay.
So Papua New Guinea is a separate country from Indonesia, and it has a separate history. The reason was a German colony, this part of Irian Jaya, I think it's called, this province of Indonesia. It had a different colonial rulers and consequently developed a different coffee culture. Papua New Guinea was, I think, British. It was basically administered by Australia. The coffee industry grew up with Australian nationals who were developing it. They, from the beginning, did a clean, washed cup in Papua New Guinea.
Yes.
That was the goal. I mean, there are little producers who do it themselves. They hold a coffee with a rock. I've seen it. But the goal is to do a wet process. I mean, that's the type that Papua New Guinea is identified with. So it's completely different from Indonesia. There's no connection, except there's a part of Indonesia on the same island as Papua New Guinea.
I will report to you, and I don't want to do too many. I try not to do any spoiler alerts, but since I picked out all the coffees, I want to tell you, I actually ran into a few, let's say a couple of roasters that themselves weren't sure whether it was wet hulled and they have it on their website as washed coffees today, samples. When I pressed them, they would say, "Oh, we think it is," and they said, "Yeah, it is probably a wet hulled," but they have it listed on their website as just washed. Seems like there's a little bit of, sometimes they use the terms interchangeably, even though, as you say, they are very different processes.
Right. Well, I think the term that a lot of people in the industry who are meticulous try to use is washed and wet hulled.
Okay.
That's more accurate.
Yeah.
Right. In other words, wet hulling is a part of the washed process.
I'm really thirsty. How about you?
Yeah, I am too. And Jason just brought the first coffee in.
Please like and subscribe if you want to see more shows like this.